Can I sit here? Dark greetings, welcome, happy October. If you do not know me, I am Anna, a psychologist in training. This channel is all about real life applications to psychology. Today I'm wearing the Sanderson Sister shirt because it is September 30th, the day that I'm recording this, which means Hocus Pocus 2 is coming out today, which I'm so excited about. Little known fact, actually we were in Salem about a week after they recorded it last year, so I'm really excited. I think it's gonna be just all the nostalgia, being able to see somewhere where we were last year. But let's get into what today's topic, which is 5 social anxiety techniques that I hope will help you. I posted a video a few weeks ago that was about the risk factors of social anxiety, and a few of you were asking like, okay, now what do I do? And so that is what this video is meant to address. I don't mean to suggest that this is a comprehensive list, definitely not. As always, not a replacement for therapy either. These are just 5 techniques that honestly helped me as a socially anxious person that are evidence-based that I hope will help you as well. The first intervention for social anxiety, and this is really the go-to intervention for all types of anxiety, is gradual exposure. Anxiety functions in a way that it sort of feeds itself. The more anxious you feel about something, the more you don't do that thing, and the more you don't do that thing, the worse your anxiety becomes. And so it's a cycle like a snake eating its own tail. So avoidance worsens the cycle, and exposure breaks the cycle. Despite it being very painful to do things that frighten you and that feel uncomfortable, that is the only solution to not feeling that discomfort and pain in the future. Essentially, you're doing your future self a favor by going through the discomfort right now. The mark of courage is not how scared you are. Courage is doing something even though it scares the shit out of you. In a way, being an anxious person gives you a bigger opportunity for courage. Because if you go to the supermarket and talk to the cashier and you're terrified while doing it, that's a very brave thing to do versus someone who loves interacting with other people, has no anxiety about it, goes and does that same thing. That's not really a brave feat for them. Essentially, the more socially anxious you are, the more of an opportunity it is for you to be courageous. So the golden standard for social anxiety is to really build that hierarchy of things that make you least anxious to most anxious, and doing a few of them in different situations over and over until you master them, and then working your way up. Like I said, therapy really helps with this. So I do strongly encourage you to seek a CBT therapist if you need to do this exposure piece of social anxiety. It's not comfortable, but ideally, once you get to the top of your hierarchy, you've mastered everything beneath it. Like, I had a professor who talked about like clients with OCD who had contamination fears. And by the end of their exposure hierarchy, they could literally eat a donut off a toilet seat. Now, should you eat a donut off a toilet seat? Probably not, but the point is that their anxiety had dissipated so completely that they could do even things that most people would find disgusting. So that is intervention number 1 for social anxiety, is creating an exposure hierarchy and then gradually working your way up. Technique number 2 is getting to the origins of your social anxiety and rewriting those origin stories. Let's say that you were socially anxious because you were really bullied in middle school. I imagine you have a certain story, a certain judgment attached with that experience, such as, I'm bullied because I will never fit in. I was bullied because I am just an awkward, terrible person and everyone sees that about me. Usually with social anxiety, it is a negative judgment of yourself about that origin story. But what if you were to rewrite it in a way that is more logical, dialectical, and self-compassionate? What if instead you were to say, you know what, I was bullied back then because adolescence is a time period that is terrible for people. You have synaptic pruning going on in people's brains. They're going through puberty. They're being little shits and they wanted to pick on someone, and I had more of a target on my back because of whatever reasons you had. And people just want to get along, and unfortunately in cliques, that's just kind of what happens. People need someone to pick on as a way of sort of being initiated into the social group, and that just happened to be me. You know, that's a way of rewriting that story that isn't so, this happened to me because I am a terrible, awkward person who will never get along with anyone, which then feeds your social anxiety. You're able to rewrite that story in a way that's more realistic and in a way that sets you up to have more positive experiences in the future, to realize it's not about you. Probably it was a mix of factors, and it doesn't mean that it's going to happen again. So that is tip number 2, is get to the origins of your origin stories and rewrite them. Tip number 3 is to pretend that everyone sees you the way somebody who loves you sees you. Sometimes people, when they are particularly raised in families that are very critical, tend to internalize that inner critic, and they constantly pick on themselves in their inner monologue. And they say terrible things to themselves because they assume that everyone else is thinking them, because they assume that everyone is like their mother, like their father, like their aunt, like their sister, or whoever it was that sort of ingrained that into them. Most times social anxiety is born because somebody is giving you strong messages that you are not a likable person, and that they see all your biggest flaws, and that you will never be good enough. And sometimes it takes a corrective experience to realize that there are people who will love you and who will accept you just the way that you are, and who do not view you that way, who see you completely non-judgmentally, who actually love the way you do things without even trying. And if you don't have that person yet, that might be very difficult to sort of get in the mindset of. You might not believe that actually it exists. But I'm here to tell you that it does exist. I mean, there are billions of people in this world, and there is at least one person who does accept you and view you in that way. My guess is you probably already have some of those people in your life, and you just aren't thinking of it, or are assuming that they actually see you like the people that criticized you did. So what would that be like if you could move through the world and assume that this person doesn't see me the way my dad saw me, or the way my uncle saw me? This person sees me the way my partner sees me, or the way my ex saw me, or the way my mom sees me. Really reframing it in your head to think more about other people accepting you, other people being on good terms with you, liking you, and not getting so bogged down in the assumption that everyone is criticizing you and secretly hates you. In fact, for someone who has this socially anxious mindset, it can be kind of mind-blowing to hear that some people actually move through the world assuming everyone likes them. I remember the first time I heard someone explicitly say that they move through the world thinking that everyone is thinking lovely things about them. It was mind-blowing to me. I was like, wait, we can do that? We can pretend that people are thinking nice things about us even if it's not true, because it still serves us? Because that's the truth, isn't it? Like, it doesn't matter if it's true. If it helps you move through the world in a less socially anxious way, it's in essence going to have that effect where more people are going to like you. But it doesn't matter ultimately if it's true or not. That is the third technique, which is to pretend that everyone sees you the way someone who loves you sees you. The fourth technique is something I've spoken about on this channel before, and that is dialoguing with and challenging your inner critic. I talked about the concept of the inner critic, this internalization of somebody that criticized us that we sort of hear all day long for people who have social anxiety. Some people are very in touch with it. They hear it almost like a personification of somebody else in their own head. Some people, like myself, actually don't have a verbal internal monologue, and so it can be harder to pin down. You're sort of getting all these messages, but they're not in like a verbal form in your head, and so it's kind of elusive. And so it can be really helpful to, first of all, put it on paper, put it in words, actually verbalize what's going on in your head, in your inner monologue, actually acknowledge it instead of just letting someone sort of whisper it in your ear. And then once you have actually acknowledged what's going on, you can check its veracity, you can check the facts, you can say, hey, what you just said there is actually not true, or I actually have a whole lot of evidence that this is not the case, or I don't really care if what you're saying is true because I still want to move on with my life. And in essence, you're starting to challenge that inner critic, to challenge that voice that speaks to you in that way. So you're dialoguing with your inner critic, you're listening to it, you're acknowledging it, but you're also checking it, and you're also challenging it when relevant, and you're always getting the last word. You don't let it have the last word ever. And lastly, the last technique that I think is helpful for social anxiety is self-compassion and acceptance that, you know what, sometimes the inner critic might be right, and that's okay. It doesn't really matter. Something that I struggle with sometimes is that I worry my social anxiety will be interpreted as aloofness or coldness, and this is nothing special. This is something that people with social anxiety worry about a lot. And I get so bogged down in trying to get reassurance or trying to seek evidence that it's not true, that other people don't see me as cold and aloof. And I did like just a brief little inventory of my close friends, asking them if that is what they first thought of me when they first met me. And most of them said no. Most of them could kind of acknowledge that either I was a shy person or they didn't perceive me as cold whatsoever. But a few people did say, yeah, I did think that. And then I was sort of left with the question, so what? So what if someone thinks I'm cold or aloof at first? Obviously, those people still became my close friends. Obviously, eventually they came around to understand that that's not me, that that's just how my shyness presents itself. Some people would even argue that maintaining an air of coldness or distance from people is something that actually is quite alluring to others. So what if that worst case scenario is true? Does it really matter? Because a lot of the techniques I've been talking about up until this point are all about check the facts, ignore the voice, say that it's not right, challenge it. But what about the times that it's right? Who cares? Does it impact your ability to move through the world? Does it impede the goals that you want to reach? Most likely not. What other people think of us actually doesn't matter as much as we think it does. It does in certain specific situations, but not usually. And so part of the acceptance of social anxiety means acknowledging that, yeah, I might have a thought that is socially anxious now and then, and that's okay. Even if it's true, it's not catastrophic. It's not the end of the world. I don't need to go cry now because there's a possibility that this person doesn't like me. It's fine. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it's unavoidable. It's not even a social anxiety thing. No one is liked by everyone. So sometimes the best thing that you can do when you hear those little comments in the inside of your head is to just say, so what? That was technique number 5. If you have any others that you found helpful for social anxiety, put those in the comments down below. I would love to read them, and I'm sure other people would find them helpful too. And I'll see you soon.